The restaurant went silent as a child's piercing cries echoed through the marble hall. Ethan, the billionaire's son, curled under the table, his small hands pressed tight over his ears. The sound of clattering silverware and hushed murmurs filled the air as the guests exchanged awkward glances. Some frowned, others whispered about spoiled children, but no one dared approach. At the center of it all sat Richard Hale, one of the most powerful men in the city, a man who had built empires with sheer will and discipline, now completely undone by the tears of his 7-year-old son. His throat tightened. He wanted to help, to comfort, to fix it, but he didn't know how. "Ethan, please," he whispered softly, his voice trembling with desperation. The boy only screamed louder, rocking back and forth, his face buried in his knees. The sound tore through Richard's chest like glass. He had faced hostile takeovers and survived financial storms, but this was something no amount of money or power could control. Waiters froze in place. The manager whispered something to a hostess, who hesitated, not knowing if she should intervene. No one wanted to anger the billionaire, but the child's cries were becoming unbearable. Richard could feel the eyes of everyone on him, judging, pitying, silently asking why a man with everything couldn't handle his own son. His fingers tightened around his napkin until it tore. He wished he could explain, that Ethan wasn't just acting out. That his boy saw the world differently, felt sound as pain, and chaos as fear. But how could he explain that to strangers when he could barely explain it to himself? The boy's wails grew more frantic. His chest heaved as his breathing became shallow and fast. Richard's heart pounded. He remembered the doctor's words, "He doesn't need your control, Mr. Hale. He needs your patience." But patience had never been his strength. Business taught him speed, efficiency, perfection. Yet here, with his son, none of those things mattered. He would have traded his entire fortune for one moment of peace for Ethan. He leaned down again, voice breaking, "It's okay, buddy. Daddy's here." But Ethan flinched away from his touch as if it burned. Then, quietly, something shifted in the air. From the back of the restaurant, the janitor put down his mop and began walking toward them. He was an older man, his uniform faded, his shoes squeaking slightly against the polished floor. The manager moved to stop him, but he raised a hand gently, a wordless gesture asking for trust. The janitor's face was calm, kind, lined with the softness of someone who'd seen pain and still chose compassion. Without a word, he knelt beside Ethan, keeping a respectful distance. He didn't touch him. Didn't speak. He simply tapped the floor with his fingers, 1, 2, 3, pause, then again, the same rhythm. Soft. Steady. Gentle. At first, no one understood what he was doing. Richard frowned, confused and desperate, watching every movement. But then he noticed, Ethan's rocking slowed. The rhythm on the floor continued, patient and unbroken, like a heartbeat. The janitor began humming, barely audible, a slow tune that floated through the tension like a breeze after a storm. It wasn't a song most people would recognize, but Richard did. His chest tightened as the melody reached him. It was the same lullaby his late wife used to hum when Ethan was a baby, the one that always calmed him when words failed. The sound hit Richard like lightning. His breath caught as memories flooded back, his wife holding Ethan against her chest, whispering that same tune late at night while he worked in his office, always too busy to join them. He blinked hard, the world blurring for a moment. The janitor's eyes met his, and there was something in them, something deep and knowing. A quiet connection that didn't need words. Ethan slowly lifted his head. His crying had softened to small hiccups. His eyes, wide and tear-streaked, focused on the janitor's fingers moving rhythmically on the tile. The man smiled, not broadly, just enough to say, "You're safe." Then, to everyone's astonishment, Ethan reached out a trembling hand and tapped the floor back, mimicking the rhythm. A small, imperfect echo, but it was enough. The janitor nodded slightly, matching the boy's tempo. Back and forth they went, a silent conversation built of rhythm and trust. Richard's eyes burned. He didn't dare move, afraid to break the fragile peace forming before him. The entire restaurant watched, breath held. The sound of tapping replaced the cries, slow and steady like rain on a quiet night. The hum returned, low and warm, and this time Ethan didn't cover his ears. He just listened. When Ethan's sobs faltered as the janitor's tapping turned into a quiet, steady hum. The sound was gentle, patient, calm, and almost magical in the way it filled the air. Slowly, the chaos in the restaurant began to fade. Waiters who had frozen in place relaxed slightly, the guests who had been whispering fell silent, and all that remained was the soft, soothing rhythm. Ethan looked up, his tear-streaked face trembling, eyes wide with confusion and recognition. His breathing slowed. The sound wasn't strange or frightening anymore. It was familiar, deeply familiar, like a voice from a dream. His tiny fingers twitched against the floor, echoing the same beat, uncertain at first, but growing steadier with each tap. Richard watched, barely daring to breathe. His heart hammered in his chest, not from fear now, but from something else, something that felt like hope. Then, the janitor began to hum a tune. The melody was simple, the kind of song that carried warmth even in silence. And then Richard's world stopped. He knew that melody. It was the same lullaby his wife, Anna, used to sing to Ethan every night. It was the song that could calm his son when nothing else could. The same song Richard hadn't heard in years, not since the day she died. His breath caught in his throat, and for a moment, the powerful billionaire felt like a lost child himself. Tears welled in his eyes as he whispered her name under his breath. The janitor continued humming, his voice trembling slightly with emotion. Then, he looked up at Richard and said quietly, "She taught me this, before she passed." The words hit Richard like a wave. He blinked, trying to understand, his mind racing through memories he hadn't allowed himself to revisit. Anna had always been kind to everyone, the staff, the gardeners, the drivers. She treated them like family. She believed kindness was never wasted, no matter how small. And then it came back to him. A stormy night, years ago, when Anna had come home late from one of her charity visits. She had told him about a young man who had lost everything, his job, his family, his hope. She said she'd helped him find work through her foundation, gave him a place to start again. People just need one person to believe in them, she had said that night. Richard hadn't thought about it since. Now that same man, her act of kindness, was kneeling before his son, returning that kindness in the most unexpected way. Richard's vision blurred with tears. He could no longer see the polished tables, the expensive suits, or the judgmental eyes of the other guests. All he saw was his little boy, quiet now, watching the janitor with trust in his eyes, and the humble man who had brought peace back into their world. Something inside Richard broke open. For years, he had drowned himself in work, thinking money could fill the void his wife's death had left behind. He had given Ethan everything, therapists, tutors, doctors, but never himself. And in trying to make his son better, he had forgotten to just love him as he was. The janitor looked at Ethan and smiled softly. "You like music, don't you, little one?" Ethan nodded, his eyes wide and shining. "She loved music too," the man continued, his voice gentle. "Said it helps people feel understood without saying a word." He tapped the floor again, and Ethan joined him, their rhythms perfectly matched now. The sound was small, almost fragile, yet it carried a power no one in the room could ignore. It was the sound of understanding, the bridge between two worlds. Richard felt his knees weaken. He slowly lowered himself beside them, the expensive fabric of his suit brushing the cold tile. For the first time in years, he didn't care about appearances, about business, about being the man everyone respected. He just wanted to be Ethan's father. He placed his hand gently on the floor, following the rhythm. Tap. Pause. Tap. The same pattern, the same lullaby. The janitor smiled and nodded approvingly. "That's it," he whispered. "He hears you now." Ethan turned to his father, eyes still wet but calm, and reached out his small hand. Richard hesitated, then took it, trembling, fragile, but real. In that moment, everything else faded. The restaurant no longer mattered. The stairs didn't matter. The only thing that existed was the warmth of his son's touch and the ghost of Anna's song lingering in the air. Richard whispered, "I'm here, buddy. I'm not going anywhere." Ethan didn't respond with words, but he smiled, a small, genuine smile that made Richard's heart ache with love and regret. Minutes passed like hours. The hum slowly faded into silence, and the restaurant, once heavy with tension, now felt peaceful. The janitor quietly stood, giving Richard a nod. Richard rose too, wiping his tears. "You knew her," he said softly. The janitor nodded. "She saved my life when no one else would," he replied. "I just wanted to return the favor." Richard swallowed hard. "You did more than that," he whispered. "You saved mine." The janitor smiled faintly and turned to leave, picking up his mop again as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But Richard knew he would never forget this night. He watched Ethan, still calm, still smiling faintly, and felt something deep within him heal. He realized that love was never lost, it simply changed form. His wife's kindness lived on through the man she once helped, and that kindness had now reached their son. As they left the restaurant, Richard carried Ethan in his arms, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Outside, the city lights shimmered, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like he could breathe again. He whispered softly to his son, "Your mom would be proud of you." Ethan rested his head on his father's shoulder, eyes closing peacefully. And somewhere deep in Richard's heart, he finally felt forgiven, not by the world, but by the woman he had loved, the son he was learning to understand, and the man he was finally becoming.